The steak was perfect. A flawless cross-hatched sear on a 1.5-inch thick slab of prime ribeye, sizzling its swan song on the grill. A cold beer was sweating condensation onto the patio table beside me. The late afternoon sun was casting long, golden shadows across my meticulously manicured, yet regulation-height, lawn. This, I thought to myself, was the pinnacle of suburban tranquility. I had escaped the sirens and the chaos of the city for this. Serenity Meadows. A place so aggressively peaceful it was almost a threat. I had been here precisely 4 months, long enough for the novelty to wear off and the low-grade, beige-tinted oppression of the Homeowners Association to set in. But in this moment, with the scent of grilled beef and freshly cut grass in the air, I was content. I was a king in my castle, a master of my tiny mortgaged domain. And that's when I saw it. Stuck to my front door, flapping gently in the breeze, was a crisp, lavender-colored envelope. Not lavender like the flower. Lavender like the color of a mild disinfectant, the shade of a passive-aggressive apology. My heart didn't sink. It did something worse. It sighed. A deep, weary sigh that seemed to originate from the very soul of my property value. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered to the steak, which offered no support. I walked over, plucked the envelope from the door, and immediately felt the unnerving quality of the paper. It was too thick, too expensive. This wasn't a flyer for a local pizzeria. This was official business. The return address was simply the Office of the President, Serenity Meadows HOA. I didn't even have to look for the name. There was only one person in this entire development who would refer to her spare bedroom as the Office of the President. Brenda. I tore it open, my thumb catching on the needlessly robust paper. A single sheet, printed in a calming but vaguely threatening font, lay within. Official Notice of Violation. Bylaw 7, Section 4C, Exterior Aesthetic Cohesion. To the resident of 114 Tulip Lane, it has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee, ARC, that your property is currently in violation of the Serenity Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions, OCC and Rs. Specifically, the garden hose currently visible on the western-facing exterior wall of your dwelling is of a non-compliant shade of forest green. As per the approved palette for exterior accessories, see Addendum H, page 14, Acceptable Earth Tones. All hoses must be of a muted, natural color, such as taupe, beige, or greige. The aforementioned vibrant hue of your hose presents a jarring visual disruption to the harmonious streetscape we strive to maintain. You have seven calendar days to remedy this situation by replacing the offending article with a compliant alternative. Failure to do so will result in a fine of $25 per day. We appreciate your immediate cooperation in preserving the beauty and value of our community. Sincerely, Brenda McGillicuddy, President, Serenity Meadows HOA, Chair, Architectural Review Committee, Guardian of Harmony. I stared at the paper. I read it again. Guardian of Harmony. She'd actually added a custom title. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to process the sheer, weaponized pettiness of it all. I looked over at my hose, coiled neatly on its hanger. It was green. A perfectly normal, hose-colored green. It was, I now realized, an agent of chaos. A green serpent in our beige Eden. I pulled out my phone and dialed my sister, Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're calling to say you've sold the house and are moving back to civilization," she said, skipping the pleasantries. "Better," I said, walking back to my rapidly cooling steak. "I've made first contact with the local high priestess. We're in a diplomatic crisis." "Brenda?" "The one and only Guardian of Harmony. Sarah groaned. What did you do? Is your grass a millimeter too tall? Did you park your car facing the wrong direction? Oh God, did you get one of the unapproved welcome mats? The one with the jaunty pineapple is apparently a gateway to anarchy. Worse, I said, taking a long pull from my beer. My garden hose is too green. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then a snort, followed by a wheezing laugh that escalated into a full-blown cackle. I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You're joking, she finally managed to say, gasping for air. You have to be joking, Alex. Nobody on earth is that insane. I'm sending you a picture of the letter, I said, snapping a photo and texting it to her. Read it and weep for the future of humanity. She calls it a jarring visual disruption. My hose, Sarah. My 50-foot, 5/8-inch diameter symbol of rebellion. I could hear her scrolling. Oh my God, she signed it Guardian of Harmony. This is a work of art. You have to frame this. I'm more likely to burn it in a ritual sacrifice to the gods of color theory, I grumbled. What am I supposed to do? Go to Home Depot and ask for a hose in Grage? Do you know what Grage even is? It sounds like a throat infection. It's the color of despair, Alex. It's the official color of HOAs everywhere, she said, her laughter finally subsiding. I told you not to move there. I told you your soul would slowly be bleached of all joy and pigment. The interest rate was good, I said weakly. It had been my mantra for months. Well, you enjoy that interest rate while you spray your regulation height petunias with your sad beige hose. I sighed, looking at my perfect steak, its moment of glory now lost. The joy had been surgically removed from the evening. This is just the beginning, isn't it? Buddy, she said, her voice turning serious. This isn't the beginning. This is the first trumpet blast of the apocalypse. Just wait until she finds out what you're hiding under that giant tarp in your driveway. I glanced over at the source of my semi-retirement and the true bane of my suburban existence. It was a 20-foot dual-axle trailer, currently shrouded by a heavy-duty canvas tarp. It took up the entire third slot of my driveway, a massive, slumbering beast. Inside was the crown jewel of Apex Pumping Solutions, the company my dad had built from the ground up and left to me when he passed last year. She hasn't said anything about it yet, I said, a knot tightening in my stomach. Oh, she will, Sarah said ominously. A woman who can get this worked up about a garden hose, she's not going to ignore a piece of industrial machinery that looks like it could modify the weather. Good luck, brother. You're gonna need it. We hung up, and I was left alone in the encroaching twilight. The lavender letter felt heavy in my hand. This wasn't just about a hose anymore. This was about a fundamental clash of world views. It was the irresistible force of my desire to be left alone versus the immovable object of Brenda's need to control everything. And I had a sinking feeling that my secret weapon, the one thing that could probably solve any problem Brenda could create, was about to become the biggest problem of all. A week later, I found myself in Hell's Community Center. The Serenity Meadows clubhouse was a monument to beige. Beige walls, beige carpet, beige folding chairs. The air tasted of weak coffee and the quiet desperation of people who have come to accept that their lives are now governed by a committee. I was here for the mandatory monthly HOA meeting, a ritual of collective suffering I had so far managed to avoid. But after Hosegate, I had defiantly bought a taupe replacement, which felt like a surrender. I figured I should probably show my face. I spotted an empty seat next to a guy named Dave, who lived across the street. Dave was a chill, mid-40s software engineer who had once complimented my Weber grill, marking him as an ally. First time? He whispered as I sat down, gesturing at the room with his chin. Is it that obvious? I whispered back. You're not wearing beige, and you still have a spark of life in your eyes. Give it an hour. At the front of the room, behind a flimsy folding table draped in a beige tablecloth, sat Brenda and her 2 lieutenants, a nervous-looking woman who obsessively straightened a stack of papers, and a stern-faced man who looked like he ironed his polo shirts with military precision. Brenda, clad in a power cardigan the color of weak tea, tapped the microphone. The resulting screech of feedback was the most exciting thing to happen in this room all year. "Settle down, everyone. Settle down," she said, though no one was talking. "We have a lot to get through tonight." For the next 20 minutes, Brenda held court. She delivered a filibuster on the moral failings of unapproved wind chimes. She presented a PowerPoint presentation, I am not making this up, on the ideal placement of decorative mailbox flags. Then came the public shaming. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy as she peered over her reading glasses at a sweet-faced old man in the front row. "It has come to my attention that a rogue petunia has been spotted in your front flower bed, a pink one." A collective gasp went through the room. Pink, the color of rebellion. Mr. Henderson shrank in his seat. "I'm awfully sorry, Brenda. My granddaughter gave it to me." "While the sentiment is lovely, Harold," Brenda cut him off. "The approved floral palette for spring is strictly whites, yellows, and pale purples. The pink is simply too vibrant. Please see to it." I felt my sanity beginning to fray. I leaned over to Dave. "Is this real? Are we in a simulation designed by a suburban mom with a control complex?" Dave just stared ahead, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. "You get used to it. Just nod and think about sports." But then Brenda moved on to new business, and my blood ran cold. "Finally," she announced, beaming as if she were about to cure cancer, "I want to discuss my new flagship project for the season, the Storm Shelter Beautification and Purification Initiative." A confused murmur rippled through the room. The community storm shelter was a concrete bunker near the retention pond, a windowless cube of Cold War-era charm. Its entire purpose was to not be beautiful. Its purpose was to withstand an F5 tornado. I know, Brenda said, raising a hand. "The shelter has been a source of dankness for years. It's unwelcoming, it's grim, and with storm season approaching, I believe our residents deserve a safe space that is also a pleasant space." I couldn't help myself. The words just bubbled up out of me, a quiet, sarcastic eruption. "Beautification?" I whispered to Dave, my voice thick with disbelief. "It's a concrete box meant to survive the apocalypse. Is she going to hang drapes, potpourri? Maybe some throw pillows to match the mushroom cloud?" Dave choked back a laugh, his shoulders shaking. But my whisper, however quiet, had been just loud enough to travel in the acoustically perfect, soul-deadening silence of the clubhouse. Brenda's head snapped in my direction. Her eyes, magnified by her glasses, narrowed into laser pointers of pure fury. "Is there something you'd like to share with the group, Mr.?" She paused, clearly not knowing my name. "Alex," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "From Tulip Lane, the one with the formerly seditious garden hose." A few nervous titters went through the crowd. Brenda's face tightened. "Mr. Alex," she said, her voice now dangerously sweet. "I don't appreciate your cynicism. Some of us volunteer our time, our precious time, to improve this community for everyone. A little gratitude wouldn't go amiss." She wasn't done. She saw her opening and went for the kill. "And speaking of community improvement," she continued, her gaze sweeping over me and landing on a point just outside the window, in the direction of my house. "It's also come to my attention that you are housing a large commercial vehicle on your property, Mr. Alex. The one under the large, unsightly tarp?" Every head in the room turned to look at me. I felt like I was on trial. "The bylaws are explicitly clear," she said, her voice ringing with triumph. "Article 9, Section 2, no commercial trucks, trailers, or heavy equipment are to be stored on residential lots. It's an eyesore, and it brings down property values for all of us. You have 1 week to move it to an approved, off-site storage facility." The room was silent. This was a public execution. My desire to be an anonymous resident had just been spectacularly obliterated. I was now Alex, the guy with the illegal hose and the mysterious property value-destroying monster in his driveway. I just stared back at her, my face hot. The seed of rebellion planted by that first lavender envelope had just been watered with a healthy dose of public humiliation. It was beginning to sprout. The next few days were a cold war. I received another notice, this time about my recycling bin being visible from the street for 3 hours past the designated pickup time. I, in turn, took to meticulously measuring the height of my grass with a ruler before I mowed it, just daring her to say something. But the trailer was the real problem. I couldn't move it. Apex Pumping Solutions, while mostly a remote management gig for me, still had contracts. The trailer housed the company's most valuable asset, a custom-built piece of engineering my dad had poured his heart and soul into. It needed regular maintenance, and there was no way I was letting it sit in some dusty, unsecured storage lot. On Saturday, fueled by a potent combination of frustration and spite, I decided it was time for some of that maintenance. I stalked out to my driveway, the morning sun glinting off the beige houses around me. I grabbed a corner of the heavy canvas tarp and with a grunt hauled it back. The effect was immediate. A passing neighbor walking his beagle stopped dead in his tracks. The beagle, sensing its owner's shock, let out a confused yip. There, gleaming in the morning light, sat the Kraken. It wasn't just a pump on a trailer. It was a masterpiece of industrial overkill. The trailer bed was a solid steel platform, on which was mounted a roaring 6-cylinder diesel engine the size of a smart car. Connected to this was the pump itself, a massive cast-iron centrifugal housing that looked like a giant snail shell forged in the heart of a volcano. Huge, 12-inch chrome pipes snaked across the platform, leading to enormous intake and outtake valves. The whole thing was controlled by a stainless steel console bristling with levers, gauges, and a big, beautiful, candy apple red emergency stop button. It was painted a deep, unapologetic industrial blue, a stark contrast to the sea of taupe surrounding it. It was magnificent, it was absurd, and it was, according to Brenda, an eyesore. I climbed onto the platform, phone in hand, and dialed the one person who understood this beast as well as my dad had. "Manny's pumping, this is Manny," a gravelly voice answered. "Hey Manny, it's Alex." "The kid, how's retirement treating you? You figured out how to work a TV remote yet, or are you still trying to subcontract it out?" Manny had been my dad's foreman for 30 years. He was 70, built like a fire hydrant, and had forgotten more about fluid dynamics than I would ever know. He now worked as my one and only consultant. "Very funny," I said, running a hand over the cool metal of the engine block. "I'm looking at the Kraken. Brenda wants it gone." "Brenda?" "The HOA lady, the local dictator, says it's hurting her property values." Manny let out a phlegmy laugh. "That rig probably is the most valuable thing in that whole plastic neighborhood. Your dad ever tell you about the time we sucked a collapsed culvert dry under the I-5? The city engineer said it would take a week. Your dad and me with that machine? We did it in 4 hours. Had to slow down so we didn't suck the asphalt off the road. She's a beast." "I know," I said, feeling a familiar mix of pride and inadequacy. He loved this thing. "He built it to suck a lake dry and ask for seconds," Manny said, his voice full of rough affection. "Don't you ever let some busybody in a cardigan tell you otherwise. So what's the problem? She running rough?" No, I just need to turn her over, check the fluids. Don't want anything seizing up. Figured I'd give the neighbors a little show while I'm at it. Good boy, Manny grunted. Check the oil before you fire up that diesel. It's not a Prius. And check the intake filter. Last job we did was that flooded quarry. You don't want a fossilized salamander getting into the impeller. We talked for another 20 minutes, going over the maintenance checklist. I knew the theory, my dad had made sure of that. But Manny had the hard-won practical knowledge. He was the voice of my father's legacy, a gruff reminder of the world of real work and tangible results I was trying so hard to leave behind. As I was about to hang up, a white sedan crept down the street, slowing to a crawl as it passed my house. It was Brenda. She was behind the wheel, her face a mask of cold fury as she stared at the exposed, gleaming glory of the Kraken. I looked right at her, raised my hand in a small, deliberate wave, and offered my most insincere, cheerful smile. Her car sped up, tires chirping on the pristine asphalt. Oh, this was war now, and I had just unveiled my nuclear option. The weather turned a week later. A churning, angry mass of dark clouds began to build on the western horizon, the kind of storm system that made local news anchors use words like significant and dangerous. The air grew heavy and thick, charged with a tense electric stillness. Tornado warnings were not just possible, they were likely. The Serenity Meadows Community Facebook group, a place normally reserved for arguments about dog poop and lost Tupperware, was now a frantic scroll of worried posts and weather map screenshots. And then, like a beacon of misplaced confidence in the digital storm, a new post appeared from Brenda. It was written in all caps, with an alarming number of exclamation points. "Fear not, residents of Serenity Meadows," it began. "As chair of the Emergency Preparedness Subcommittee, I will be personally preparing our newly sanitized storm shelter for your safety this afternoon. Its doors will be open by 5 p.m. for anyone who needs refuge. Stay safe." I read the post and felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the weather. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Dave. "Did you see it? She's going to sanitize it." "With what? A bottle of Windex and a roll of paper towels?" I texted back. "Knowing her, she'll probably try to power wash the inside." What could possibly go wrong? It was a joke, a sarcastic throwaway line. I had no idea how horribly right I was. From my office window, which overlooked the street, I saw a sight that made me freeze. It was Brenda, marching with grim determination down the sidewalk toward the retention pond and the storm shelter. She was wearing yellow rain boots, and under one arm, she carried a small bucket of cleaning supplies. In her other hand, she dragged a long, coiled, aggressively green garden hose, not even a taupe one. The hypocrisy was stunning. She looked like a tiny, khaki-clad soldier heading into a battle she couldn't possibly win. The sky above her was the color of a nasty bruise. An hour later, the first drops of rain began to fall. They were heavy and fat, splattering against the windows like thrown pebbles. The wind began to howl, and the sky opened up. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge. Then the shouting started. It was faint at first, barely audible over the roar of the storm. But it grew louder, more panicked. I went to my front door and looked out. A small group of people were huddled under the meager shelter of an oak tree, pointing frantically toward the storm shelter. It was Mr. Henderson, the Petunia guy. He had apparently decided to be a good citizen and drop off a first aid kit. He had opened the heavy steel door to the shelter and had been met with a full-blown tidal wave. I threw on a jacket and ran outside, the rain instantly plastering my hair to my head. I joined the small, soaked crowd. The scene was one of utter chaos. Water wasn't just seeping from under the shelter door. It was gushing. The entire concrete stairwell leading down into the bunker had become a churning, muddy waterfall. Brenda was there, of course. She was standing at the edge of the torrent, soaked to the bone, her face a mask of wild-eyed panic and complete denial. "It's not my fault!" she shrieked over the storm, her voice cracking. "A pipe burst. It's the county's shoddy construction. I was just rinsing down the walls. It needed a deep clean." Dave was beside me, his face pale. "Rinsing it down? With what?" Brenda gestured vaguely with a trembling hand. "There's a maintenance spigot inside. I attached the hose for more pressure. It must have been faulty." She hadn't just used a garden hose. She had hooked it up to a main water line inside the shelter's utility closet, and she had clearly broken it. She hadn't just cleaned the shelter, she had hydraulically filled it. The one place designed to keep us safe from water in the sky was now being filled with water from the ground. The irony was so thick I could have drowned in it. Someone was on their phone with 911 shouting to be heard. They put it on speaker. "Yes, ma'am. We have multiple reports," the dispatcher's calm, disembodied voice said. "All fire and rescue units are currently responding to high-priority calls related to the storm. We can dispatch a pump truck to your location, but I have to be honest, it will be at least 2 to 3 hours, maybe longer." 2 to 3 hours. The local news alert on my phone buzzed with a fresh warning. Tornado cell confirmed, tracking northeast, expected to hit our area in the next 90 minutes. The crowd's low-level panic instantly escalated to genuine, primal fear. We were trapped. The storm was bearing down on us, and our only sanctuary was now a rapidly filling underground swimming pool, courtesy of the guardian of harmony herself. The neighborhood of quiet, beige tranquility had suddenly become a death trap. I stood there in the driving rain, watching the water churn, watching my neighbors' faces contort with fear, watching Brenda start to sob hysterically while blaming the plumbing, the county, and probably the rogue pink petunia. And something inside me just broke. It was a quiet, clean snap, the part of me that wanted to be left alone, the part that wanted to avoid conflict and just grill my steaks in peace. It just evaporated. I looked at the chaos she had created through sheer, mind-boggling incompetence. I looked at the genuine terror in Mr. Henderson's eyes. I thought of my dad, a man who ran toward problems with a wrench in his hand, not away from them. He would have found this whole situation hilarious, but he would have already been working on a solution. I was done being quiet. I was done being cynical. I was done being Alex, the new guy. I turned and started walking back toward my house. My stride was purposeful, my focus absolute. The rain, the wind, the panicked shouts, it all faded into background noise. "Alex, where are you going, man?" Dave yelled after me. "We've got to figure something out." I didn't turn around. I just raised a hand, a silent signal. Just wait. I strode into my garage, my mind a sea of calm clarity. My hands moved with a purpose they hadn't felt in a year. Keys. I grabbed the heavy-duty set from the hook. I hit the garage door opener. A minute later, a sound ripped through the neighborhood, a sound that was not thunder. It was a deep, guttural, mechanical roar as a 6-cylinder diesel engine coughed to life. It settled into a rumbling, ground-shaking idle that promised immense power. The Kraken was awake. I backed the enormous trailer out of my driveway, the rig's powerful floodlights cutting brilliant white swaths through the rain and gloom. Jaws dropped. My terrified neighbors stopped their panicked chatterings and just stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. I navigated the rig down the street with a practiced ease I didn't know I possessed, the huge tires crushing a corner of Brenda's prized petunia-free lawn as I swung wide. It was a small, deeply satisfying act of vengeance. I backed the behemoth right up to the edge of the curb, its rear platform perfectly aligned with the flooded shelter entrance. It looked like a battleship docking next to a canoe. Suddenly, a figure darted out of the crowd, waving its arms frantically. It was Brenda, her face streaked with rain and mascara, her panic momentarily replaced by a fresh wave of indignant fury. "What do you think you're doing?" she screamed, trying to be heard over the engine's roar. "That is an unapproved commercial vehicle. You can't bring that here. You'll damage the community lawn. I forbid this." I was already on the trailer's platform, my boots clanging on the steel. I was in the zone, a place of pure, focused action. My father's world. I unlocked the clamps holding the primary intake hose, a 12-inch diameter, steel-reinforced behemoth that looked like an anaconda's esophagus. I turned to look down at her, this tiny, shrieking architect of our potential doom. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or frustration. I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. I leaned over the side and yelled, my voice cutting through the noise with absolute authority. "Brenda, with all due respect, shut up." Her mouth snapped closed, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't give her another thought. I grabbed the massive hose and, with a grunt, kicked the heavy intake nozzle down the stairwell. It landed with a deep, satisfying thump splash in the churning water below. I vaulted over to the control panel, its gauges glowing warmly in the stormy darkness. My fingers flew across the switches, a sequence Manny and I had gone over a dozen times. Fuel line open, throttle unlocked, pump engaged. I grabbed the main lever, a thick, satisfying handle of polished steel. I took one last look at the gushing waterfall that was once a staircase. Then I slammed the lever forward. The result was instantaneous and violent. The engine noise escalated from a roar to a cataclysmic shriek. The entire trailer shuddered as the clutch engaged. The massive intake hose stiffened like a flexed bicep, and the water in the stairwell began to visibly churn, a vortex forming around the intake nozzle. A moment later, a torrent of water erupted from the outtake pipe on the other side of the rig, a solid brown column the diameter of a telephone pole. I had aimed it perfectly. It blasted across the street and into the storm drain, which began to gurgle like a mythological beast taking the drink of its life. The crowd was completely silent, mesmerized. They were witnessing something that defied their suburban sensibilities. They were watching a man solve an impossible problem with overwhelming, glorious force. The water level in the shelter entrance wasn't just receding, it was plummeting. It was like watching a bathtub drain after someone had pulled a plug the size of a manhole cover. I glanced at my watch. 1 minute. The water was gone from the top steps. The gushing became a cascade. 2 minutes. The cascade became a stream. The vortex at the bottom was now sucking mud and leaves from the floor. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The deep liquid roar of the pump changed pitch, rising to a disgusting high-pitched slurping sound. It was the sound of a machine that had run out of water to drink. It was sucking air. It was empty. I calmly pulled the lever back. The engine spooled down, the shriek returning to a rumble, then to a clatter, then to silence. The sudden quiet was absolute, broken only by the steady drumming of the rain and the distant fading wail of a tornado siren. I stood on my platform, drenched and breathing heavily, a god of hydraulics who had just commanded the flood to retreat. And below me, where there had been a watery grave, was now just a damp, muddy, but completely empty storm shelter. Just as the collective shock of the crowd was beginning to thaw into murmurs of disbelief, a new sound cut through the rain. The rhythmic whoop of a police siren. 2 patrol cars, their red and blue lights painting strobing, chaotic patterns on the wet houses, pulled up to the curb. Brenda, who had been standing frozen in a state of catatonic shock, snapped back to life. This was an authority she understood. This was her turf. "Officers! Officers! Thank God you're here!" she shrieked, running toward the 2 cops as they emerged from their vehicles, rain dripping from the brims of their hats. "Arrest him! Arrest that man!" She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. I was still on the platform of the Kraken, calmly beginning to unclamp the now limp intake hose. The lead officer, a man with a tired face and a thick mustache that had seen more than its share of suburban drama, looked from Brenda's hysterical face to me, then to the massive, silent machine, and finally to the miraculously empty storm shelter. His expression was one of profound confusion. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice a low, calm rumble that contrasted sharply with Brenda's screeching. "The problem?" she squawked, incredulous. "He brought that monstrosity onto community property. It's a violation of at least a dozen bylaws. He has no license, no permit. He's a menace. He damaged my lawn." Before the officer could even formulate a response, the crowd, my silent, awestruck audience, found its voice. It wasn't one person who spoke up. It was a chorus. Mr. Henderson, his face full of a newfound courage, stepped forward. "Officer, that's not what happened. That woman," he said, pointing right back at Brenda, "flooded our storm shelter. We had a tornado warning and she flooded our only safe place." Dave was right behind him. "It's true, officer. We were all trapped. The fire department said it would be hours. Alex here," he gestured up at me. "He just saved all of our asses. He pumped the whole thing dry in like 3 minutes. A woman I didn't even know chimed in, her voice sharp. She was trying to sanitize it with a hose and broke a pipe. Then she had the nerve to call the cops on the one person who could fix her mess. The second officer was now taking in the scene, his eyes lingering on the Kraken with something that looked suspiciously like admiration. The lead cop held up a hand for quiet. He looked back at Brenda, his face now a mask of weary patience. "So, let me get this straight, ma'am. You're saying you accidentally flooded the public storm shelter during a tornado warning, and you're filing a complaint against the man who unflooded it?" Brenda's face crumpled. The logic, when laid out so simply, was devastating. "But the bylaws, the commercial vehicle," she stammered, her argument deflating like a cheap pool toy. The officer sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of 1,000 pointless domestic disputes. He turned his gaze to me. It wasn't accusatory. It was appraising. "Nice rig," he said, giving a single, decisive nod. Then he turned back to Brenda. "Ma'am, there's no crime here. It looks to me like the problem is solved. I suggest you go home and let these people prepare for the storm. What's left of it." He and his partner got back in their cars. They didn't even file a report. They just left, their taillights disappearing into the rain. Brenda was left standing on the wet pavement, alone, the entire community staring at her with a new, unified expression of contempt. Her reign was over. She had been publicly, comprehensively, and officially defeated. The next day the sun was out, steaming the moisture from the asphalt. The world felt scrubbed clean. A white van from Gus's 24/7's Water Damage and Restoration was parked by the shelter. A gruff, barrel-chested man with a clipboard was standing at the entrance, scratching his head. This was Gus, the contractor hired by the HOA's now panicked insurance company to assess the damage. He was talking to Dave and a couple of other board members who had shown up to survey the scene. I was watching from my driveway, sipping my coffee. "I just don't get it," Gus was saying, his voice carrying in the quiet morning air. "The call I got said this place was submerged. A total loss. I was expecting to see a swamp, maybe find fish, but look at it." He gestured into the shelter. "There's barely any residual moisture. The concrete is practically dry. I mean, yeah, it's a muddy mess, but there's no standing water. Whatever you guys did, you did it fast. You saved yourselves tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in black mold remediation." Dave, with a grin I could see from 50 yards away, simply pointed a thumb over his shoulder toward my house. Wasn't us, Gus. It was that guy. And that thing. He pointed directly at the Kraken. Gus's eyes followed Dave's finger. He saw the machine, uncovered and gleaming in the morning sun. His professional nonchalance vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed wonder of a kid on Christmas morning. He walked slowly, almost reverently, across the street. "Whoa," he breathed, circling the trailer. He ran a hand over the massive pump housing, whistled at the size of the diesel engine, and peered at the control panel. "Holy cow, man. Is that a custom Triton 12-inch impeller with a direct-drive diesel? I haven't seen a setup this clean since, well, ever." He looked at me, his eyes alight with professional respect. "You're the guy who drained that thing yesterday?" "I am," I said, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through my chest. It was pride. "Your dad wouldn't happen to be Jack, would he? Jack from Apex Pumping?" I was stunned. "Yeah, he was. You knew him?" Gus broke into a huge grin. "Knew him? Hell, he was a legend. Pulled my butt out of a fire on a big commercial job downstate about 10 years ago. A water main burst in a high-rise basement. We were looking at a catastrophe. Jack rolls up with this exact rig, laughs, and has the place bone dry before our lunch break was over. Best in the business." He shook his head in fond memory. I was so sorry to hear he passed. He was one of the good ones. He reached out and shook my hand vigorously. "You do his name proud, kid. I mean it." For the first time since my dad died, the massive machine in my driveway didn't feel like a burden. It didn't feel like an obligation or a reminder of a life I didn't want. It felt like a connection. It felt like a legacy. "Listen," Gus said, his tone shifting to business. "I'm looking at a massive municipal contract to dredge the old shipping canal. It's too big for my gear, but this—" He patted the Kraken's flank like it was a prize-winning stallion. "This would eat it for breakfast. You still operating as Apex?" I stood up a little straighter. "Yes, we are." "Good," Gus said, pulling a card from his wallet. "Give me a call. Let's talk. Your dad taught me that the right tool makes any job easy. And you, my friend, have got the right tool." That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The atmosphere was different. The beige room felt less oppressive, more like a blank canvas. The tension was gone, replaced by a strange, buoyant sense of community. Brenda wasn't there. A flustered-looking board member announced at the beginning of the meeting that she had submitted her resignation via a curt email that morning. A "for sale" sign had already been hammered into her front lawn. When I walked in, expecting awkward silence, I was met with something entirely different. A smattering of applause. It started with Dave and Mr. Henderson, then spread through the room. It was surreal. These were the same people who had silently watched me get publicly shamed for my hose a few weeks ago. They offered me a seat on the board, which I politely but firmly declined, explaining that my temperament was better suited to solving acute hydraulic crises than debating the acceptable shades of petunias. That got a genuine laugh. They officially thanked me on behalf of the entire community. Then, in a move that felt like a formal peace treaty, they held a vote. The motion: to amend Bylaw 9, Section 2, to create a special emergency management equipment exemption for the vehicle, by name, located at 114 Tulip Lane. It passed unanimously. The Kraken was officially a legal resident of Serenity Meadows. A week later, I was back in my happy place, standing at my grill. The steak was perfect. The sun was golden. A cold beer was sweating beside me. True suburban tranquility had been achieved. My phone buzzed on the table. It was an email. The subject line made my heart momentarily clench in a spasm of PTSD. Subject: official notice of violation. It was from Dave, the newly elected HOA president. My hand trembled slightly as I tapped it open. Body: Alex. It has come to the attention of the Hospitality Committee that your steaks are smelling entirely too good, and you have not invited your immediate neighbors to partake. This constitutes a serious violation of Community Spirit Bylaw 1, Section 1, Don't be a jerk. This situation is untenable. I expect you to remedy this violation at your earliest convenience. My family eats theirs medium rare. We'll bring the potato salad. Regards, Dave. President, Serenity Meadows HOA, Chief of Neighborhood Good Vibes. I let out a laugh, a real deep laugh that came from my gut. I looked over at my driveway where the Kraken sat, uncovered, its bold blue paint gleaming. It wasn't an eyesore. It wasn't a burden. It was my dad's legacy. It was my trophy. It was the ridiculous, overpowered, beautiful machine that had allowed me to finally, accidentally, find my place in this weird, beige, and now surprisingly wonderful neighborhood. I picked up my phone and replied to the email. On my way.